Alright, so what we're going to be doing today is doing a manual conversion on a Nissan R31 wagon. The same applies for the sedans, and Holden VL is pretty much the same as well. The engine in this is a Nissan RB30 straight 6 3-litre engine, naturally aspirated. Now obviously you're going to be wanting to know what you need. What you're going to need is gearbox, manual gearbox obviously, manual tail shaft, cross member, pedals, clutch, slave cylinder, master cylinder, clutch boot thing, shifter. And since you're getting putting a new gearbox in anyway, well, a gearbox in, might as well change the throw bearing and rear main seal while you're down there. Got some grease too for it all. And yeah, I've done a compression test on the engine. It's come back all good. So let's hopefully get this all ready. Alright, so onto the car. There's the automatic transmission. Blah blah blah. Okay, so first thing you want to do is you want to take tail shaft out. So there's 4 14mm bolts that you want to take out. Then make your way up to the tail shaft center bearing, remove that and pull it out. When you get a bucket or something, when you pull it out, sometimes there's going to be fluids falling out of there. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, so once you get these rear tail shaft bolts out, and actually one was a 15 and one was a 14, there's the center bearing of the tail shaft. It's the main one. You should be able to just easily just pull it out. And it's out. There's some of that little bit of mess, but it's no drama. Yeah, it's easy enough. Alright, let's get on to the gearbox. Now what I've done is I have disconnected the shift linkage. It's simple as just a little split pin. I've also gone around the transmission and I have disconnected and tied up any wires that's going to run itself from the transmission to the battery, behind the battery. All the bolts on the belt housing are pretty easy to get to, except for the one at the furthest point of the engine, which is at the back there. Now I've gotten all the other bolts, cracked them, loosened them up, and I've taken the starter motor out to give me a bit more room, and also obviously with your battery disconnected. And all of these plugs here, which are running from the transmission and linking up to these, you're going to have to disconnect them as we pull the transmission out. Also, before we pull it out, you have to disconnect the oil cooler, well, transmission oil cooler, which is just here, and it's just 2 lines. There's a couple of brackets there as well, and one of the other bolts is just down there, just at the back here. It's easy to get to. They're all 14mm, even the starter motor ones. Yeah, so just try to get with this one. You can use a long extension or use a really long 14mm spanner, but first off, try to get yourself a bit of room when you can. And once you've got all that and all the bolts are loosened and you want to take them out, chuck the jack under the transmission, and then you're good to start making your way back and loosening off the cross member, the gearbox cross member. But I've already done that. There's 4 17mm bolts there. I've already loosened a few of them up just so I can get under there, no dramas, and yeah, it's all looking pretty good. Okay, to give yourself a bit more room underneath, just so when you're trying to get that last bolt out, and you're going to take this out anyway, may as well take out the shifter and all the rest of that. All it is you'll have your cover thing, like so, holding it there. Just pop that up with a flatbed screwdriver. Then there'll be four screws holding this in. Get that out, and then to get to these four, there'll be four of them. To get those ones out, undo that, undo these two, that'll come off, and then you just got this one left, and then you should be able to pull it straight back out. And when you do that, you'll be able to get to those and should be able to pull out. There'll be a couple of wires you need to disconnect, but they should be pretty easy to do. All right. All right, so focus. So final part for getting that rear bolt out was I removed the gear selector. Got a ton of extensions on this. It's probably good if you get a big extension, but I didn't have one. And I put a light, I don't know if you can see, put a light down the back on so I could see exactly where I was going, because if you round this nut, you're completely stuffed. You're going to have to probably take the engine and gearbox out as one unit. But I got it, and that's how you do it, I guess. Just to show you at the front here, I had this light just directed there so I could see exactly what I was doing. Now what I ended up having to do was I loosened off all the gearbox cross-member bolts, and on the other side is the same. What I did was I loosened them up, got a plank of wood, stuck it under the transmission, lowered it right down just so it's hanging just off the edge of the gearbox studs or whatever, and then I put the ratchet through and lined it up with that light, and it's all good. But remember, before you start like really giving it a go to get it off, make sure it's biting hard, because if you strip it, man, it's going to be a bloody pain. So what I've pretty much done is just disconnected all the wires from the transmission before lowering it all down. The way I see it is, if you just disconnect them all now, you can save all the drama later. They're all pretty simple, pretty much just plugs that you just pull apart. The gear selector one is two 10mm bolts and one little screw. There's one more up there, that white wire above the clip, just going to disconnect that. It's looking to me like a 10mm. Most of the stuff that I've done is just pretty much 17 mils, 14 mils and 10 mil sockets that are just required for it so far. And yeah, so next step now I guess is to pull the gearbox transmission back and then see how we go. Okay, now sort of hard to see, but I'm up to the step now where I've pretty much just gone over everything, make sure none is holding the gearbox. I still got the bolts, and I'm going to get them out now. Just went through, make sure. With these oil cooling lines, I just disconnected one from that banjo bolt and pretty much ripped it back here behind it, because it doesn't really matter to me if the lines get crushed or whatnot or whatever happens to it. But either way, now I'm going to go take the rest of the bolts out of the belt housing. Make sure you got your jack under it ready to go. And you know, if you haven't gotten all the wires out, that's no worries. It's just when you're lowering it, try to make sure you take it easy, take it slow, double check over everything, and you know, keep going, and generally, because you're going to be pushing the gearbox back, the transmission, we're going to be pulling the transmission back. The torque converter is in there as well, so make sure that, you know, take it easy as we go back with it. And if you see any wires anywhere that's snagging or doing anything like that, just take your time, stop, disconnect them, and it should be all sweet. Alright, let's do this. Alrighty, now what I've done is I've got enough room to push the transmission back a bit, and I've also taken off the, I don't know what you call these things which hold the transmission on, I guess. Either way, when you do that, there's 4 bolts on the torque converter. You're going to have to loosen them off. They're pretty easy to get to once you remove the thing, but what I did was to spin the flex plate on the torque converter. All you're going to need is a 27mm socket and a breaker bar just to spin it, just to turn the crank collar. And when you do that, it'll just spin the flex plate with the torque converter. You got to do this before you take it off. And yeah, then once everything's disconnected, and it should be all good to go. Make sure you got things to clean up spillage if you don't drain the transmission first. I would recommend draining it first, even though I didn't, but oh well. Alright, let's get to it. And it's out. Simple as that. All I did was, after those torque converter bolts were out, just gave it a couple of tugs back, lowered it a bit, and then she just came straight out. Simple as that. Alright, now we'll get on to part 2 with putting the manual box in.